Hi, I'm Ikea, and for today's video, I want to have an in-depth look into the updated DPS tables, as I recently went through and updated most of them, all of them actually. And we'll link to them, of course, as if you're not aware of them, I have a folder containing a bunch of DPS tables, some of them containing close to raw figures, basically, but raw figures for a level 40 character that has the watch filled in, which is the main table. And then following that up, we have several tables of weapons, specifically each weapon type on a build that kind of fits for them. So for the AR, so we have Striker, for SMG we have Striker, for LMG we have Striker, for rifles we have a high-end glass, for shotguns we have a Hunter's Fury, for pistols we have a high-end build, and for MMRs we have Hotshot kind of as their build. And kind of comparing them actually on build, because of course, by their base values, some weapons do have some mods, some weapons don't have certain mods. And because of that, we kind of need to compare them on build. All of these have been updated to TU23. I've added also a few additions, especially in the comparing on build ones. As we'll go through them, I'll point those out. And I just basically wanted to update on what changes happened, as some were undocumented changes as well, and we'll go over those in here. But there was also some buffs, one nerf basically to the Lexington as the lone standout. And what does that mean in actuality? What's the end result of all that? We'll kind of discuss that. We'll go weapon. We'll start with the base one and then go weapon by weapon, and we'll discuss kind of what has changed in that category. This isn't as full as we did last season with the full in-depth looks, because that was kind of needed back then. This is kind of an update to those. So if you need to, maybe go take a refresher with some of those, especially with those specific weapon types at the end. I kind of explain which weapons are going to be the better choices in that category. But as we go through the weapon types in here as well, I'll kind of highlight what some of the better picks are just in general. So it'll have that information in there. It will all be timestamped down below, so you can jump around to weapon types if you're just interested in some. And let's go get started. And we're going to, of course, start out with the main file, basically, of here, which is this 0.0 burst sustain and damage per mag table, which, if we open it up, has starts always per weapon type. It has tabs at the bottom to jump around between weapon types. So, for instance, SMG, LMG, and such. And in here, we always start with sustain, going to burst, going to damage per mag, basically, and then to, depending on the weapon type, for instance, we have a fast stance comparison as well, or for some weapon types where the base damage also matters, we have a base damage comparison there. And let's actually just go through all of these and kind of just discuss them briefly. I'm not going to go as in-depth. If you really want an in-depther look, because really all that changed for this season is a few weapons got some base changes. A few weapons also last time around were not correctly set up. They have been fixed, like the Dark Winter. But there hasn't actually been too much change in here. So we're just going to more focus on the changes. So there is a link as well to, in this playlist of the in-depth looks, you can actually scroll a little bit back and kind of find those TU22 year 2 or year 6 season 2 videos as well that go much more in-depth into each category. This is basically just an update onto those. Let's actually make this a little bit bigger, of course. Mostly we'll be looking at them in burst. We'll discuss their sustain as well on the weapon types. Burst is basically what we mostly pick a weapon on. It's basically has to have good burst, not too bad sustain, not too bad damage per mag, and kind of not too bad handling and other soft stats. So I would consider basically burst, sustain, and damage per mag kind of hard stats, and handling and such soft stats basically, which also matter. But here, this is an important component to know about, because you can't just go by as well by just knowing the DPSs of the weapons. You need to know as well how they handle in the game and such. But that's a whole long discussion to have, which we won't have here. First off, the Lexington. Lexington, of course, as one of the, is the one listed weapon that technically got a nerf. There's actually another one as well in the Dark Winter, which we'll get to into SMGs in a second. But yeah, the Lexington got its base a little bit reduced. It is basically a 1.15% reduction from its old number. And it used to be on the top of this list. Now it's behind the F2000. And I've already seen some people go like, oh, because it's behind the F2000 on this list, it must be worse than the F2000. So we picked the F2000, as we'll see on build. And that's why we do those on build calculations as well. And kind of actually consider those actually a much better source. The F2000 is actually behind the Lexington. It is also even behind the FAMAS. And it is even behind the Fall in burst output when it is put on a striker. Now, of course, the build kind of also depends, but for general use striker, yeah, actually F2000 is less, and that's down to this -1 mod. Now, in here, we're not actually accounting for those. These tables are mostly here just to have the base damages of everything, to have the RPMs and such, to have the reload speeds, and these are also the numbers, for instance, for the reload speed with a character that has the watch filled in with the reload speed and such, because that's the numbers I mostly care about. Primary use of these are always just for myself, and then I kind of share them. Now, bases, again, as with the last times, it is off by their numbers, or the numbers that they put on out on those tables were always off by a few. And I'm not sure what is exactly causing that, why that is the case, but if you calculate using the bases given by their tables, you don't get the results as in-game. So these are all, again, back calculated from in-game to their base value, and to make calculations kind of line up with in-game, we kind of have to use these base values. That's also why nowadays, yeah, we kind of have to kind of use this, and we can't actually trust the numbers that they put out with that base amount. And yeah, the Lexington, while it went down a little bit, it is still... What we can do is, because the Lexington and the FAMAS, they have the same amount of mods. So on damage perspective, the Lexington is still ahead of the FAMAS. The FAMAS in the past already being the second place in front of the F2000 when it's on build. We can already say that, yeah, Lexington is still the top pick, and it still is. Also, on top of that, of course, the Lexington handles better. It has a long rail. There is a lot of goods to it beyond even just its damage. The other thing that came in as well, First Sight as the Valentine's item. I've added it in here. What the First Sight, of course, doesn't have is actually different stats on these core stats except reload speed. So what the First Sight has is higher headshot damage and a slower reload. And we do account for that on build. Now here on the burst tables, of course, the reload isn't factored in, but on the sustain table, we can see that actually the First Sight is behind the other AKs, and specifically as well the AKM that it is based on, kind of, because of course, yeah, it's taking longer to reload. And in these tables, we're not accounting for the bonus that it gets to headshots. So again, we need to check that on build. That's why the on builds exist. The rest of this didn't change too much. All of the weapons got a decent increase or an improvement to their reload speed, so they are faster to reload. There is actually a few standouts here. The Honey Badger as well kind of got a much faster reload, as we'll see on build in a bit. It is actually ahead of the Carbine 7, and at this point, in the past, the Carbine 7 used to have, well, actually the Carbine 7 didn't get an improvement to its reload speed. In the past, I would pick the Carbine 7 over the Honey Badger because they were close enough together, and the Honey Badger was actually a little bit slower to reload. So they've kind of changed that now. And yeah, the Honey Badger would, for me, now be like a straight up pick over the Carbine 7. But the standouts in here are still the same. FAMAS, Fall, F2000, and the CTAR are actually the picks I would pick out of here. Each of them having some pros and the cons of themselves. We'll discuss them a little bit more when we get to the ARs. Let's move on to SMGs right away. On the SMGs, we have one new addition in the Ox Pecker, in the exotics. The main SMGs didn't change much. There is actually one unlisted change in all that, and that is that Dark Winter for the entirety of last season had the stats were changed into 22 in that season, basically in year 6, season 2. The Dark Winter used to have the stats of before that, which were better. So it wasn't actually the same stats as the Vector 45 is here. So it used to have better stats, a better base, and a better reload than this. Now it has been brought into line. So in the past, the Dark Winter was actually a better pick than especially if you're going for killer, it was even a better pick than Attack Vector. Now that is no longer the case. Attack Vector actually kind of is they're around the same numbers. It depends on build, how much crit damage you have on them. But the attack vector and the Dark Winter are about the same with Killer activated, but that then also means that when Killer isn't activated, because of course Dark Winter gets so much more from Killer, it means that the attack vector is much ahead before it procs it. And because of that, the attack vector with Killer is going to be now the go-to over the Dark Winter. So that was an undocumented change, although, well, that can be forgiven, but it is actually good that they kind of fixed that. This isn't per se a nerf. This is kind of, it should have been this way because it's weird for a named item to not have the same stats as its item that it's based on. With the inclusion of the Oxpecker, we'll kind of see it on the SMG on build, but it is the same stats as an MPX. What it does have, though, is 10 more rounds. It has the same 15 crit chance as well. And then it does have a little bit of optimal range and, of course, its talent. So it kind of will fall or stand or fall with its talent. We're not going to go too deep into discussing that in here, but stats-wise, it is kind of an MP7, and MP7 is kind of in the middle of the pack here. The topics are still, yeah, the attack vector is my go-to. I would say the Vector 45 can be a choice as well, especially if you're using Dodge Long Rare, for instance, with some tools that are available for it. And then also the SMG 9s are a good pick in the SMG category. Let's move on to LMGs. And with the LMGs, we also see actually that there in this category, there haven't been any base changes or anything. It's only been some reload changes, but that does actually matter quite a bit for LMGs. They have, of course, kind of long reloads. The MG5 now is really fast of a reloader. It is in the realm of ARs. Basically, it is kind of reaching up in there, especially once we see it on build in a little bit. The Negavs, the M249s are still pretty good picks in here as well. They didn't actually give the RPK or L86 some love there. The L86 actually not getting any increase or improvement to its reload speeds, which is kind of odd, actually. I was expecting these to kind of be, because they're decent, but they could use some help because we're not picking them nowadays. In here as well, of note, just to highlight that, we're setting up the weapons in multiple ways. The rate of fire that is listed here, that means that it is a rate of fire mag in the pouch, basically. On LMGs, they have a pouch. You can either put plus 50 rounds from gunner or rate of fire mag. Now, with MG5s and such, I wouldn't per se put a rate of fire mag in there. We're kind of including them for completeness sake, but what we could kind of do is, for instance, an M249 with a rate of fire mag, compare that to an MG5 with a pouch mag. Now, of course, here, then again, this is a -1 mod weapon where we would lose some crit chance or some crit damage on it, 5 crit chance or 10 crit damage, depending on the mods, or even the ability to just put a stability mod or an accuracy mod. So there is a cost to that, which, yeah, we're not kind of dealing with here, but yeah, we'll see it on build in a little bit. But overall, yeah, I would still say that the MG5 especially is a great pick with that reload. And this is then specifically not the infantry MG5, but the normal MG5. All the other ones also got a decent increase. Well, not all, excluding the L86 and RPKs. They're kind of still very slow. But even the M249 actually got an improvement to this. This also carries over kind of to the Pestilence, becoming a lot faster. One that stands out is actually the Stoner, got a really fast reload, and I saw a little bit of hype around it, although I would say, we'll see in a minute when we go to LMGs on build. I just generally wouldn't pick a Stoner, as we see there as well, because the muzzle slot on a Stoner is as well a fixed 20% stability mod, so it will lose some crit chance on top of it, especially when you're going to have a GR9, for instance, or as we'll see, some other picks. In the LMG category, yeah, there wasn't too much of a shakeup, especially though that MG5 now being even faster of a reload is actually, yeah, it is very competitive. And I've been actually just running MG5s here and there as a main weapon and not even running them with fast hands, but with killers or measured. And that works out pretty well. Going on to rifles, we have in here, we do have a few base or damage changes. Most of the weapons got some improvement to their reload speed, except for the 1886, and I believe the Light 104, or yeah, the Light 104, I think, didn't get an increase either, or an improvement to their reload speed either. And of course, the 1886 is kind of in its own category, being almost an MMR in the rifle category. But the base-wise, Light 104, Resolute Mark 47, and UIC did get a little bit of improvement to their base damage, so they did actually get an improved damage, which would show up kind of in burst. And in there, though, they didn't in the end go far enough, I feel. In PTS, the UIC was slated to have around a 13% increase. The other two were around 4%. The UIC in the end got brought down to be around the same 4%. And while the UIC feels really great to shoot and such, yeah, you do give a lot of damage. We're not per se comparing against the M16A2 up there, more so like the Mark 17 and the 6CQB and the 6716 kind of area. We still, against them, give up quite a bit of damage. Now, for comfort's sake, I can definitely see going with that. And actually, on some builds, I do actually use this, but I'll also always keep a much harder hitting weapon for when shit gets real, basically. So definitely usable, a little bit more usable than it even used to be because people were already using the UIC. Now, in the exotics, not much change there either. It did make some weapons a little bit faster, and especially this Dr. Home and such being a little bit faster. We see that same as well, actually, in the classic M1A and also the M1A CQB slash SOCOM M1A. They actually got a much better reload speed or reload timings, and you do feel that quite well. And actually, the classic M1A has returned to being a pick for me. I generally wouldn't pick it last season because, yeah, they had very long reloads. They didn't have enough damage per mag, basically, so you would hit the reload, and the magazine size, of course, was quite tiny. We'll see on build that actually is decent-ish nowadays. Going on to shotguns. Shotguns actually didn't receive any changes to them, which was a little bit odd. We'll likely see that in next season, or maybe in a patch in between, but likely season. So this has stayed exactly the same as it used to be. To me, the standout picks in here, because this is, for instance, one of those places where we don't pick the top bursters, because the double barrel shotgun and the sawed-off double barrel, they seem interestingly higher than everything else. But to go back to that kind of the point I was making earlier, these have horrendous sustain. So what they gain in burst, they kind of lose in sustain. We do pick on burst, but the other stats matter too. So it needs to be a good burster that also has good sustain, preferably also good damage per mag. And then on top of that, preferably as well, some good handling traits, or good enough handling traits that it's worth using. The double barrel shotgun, for instance, here fails miserably on sustain and damage per mag, basically, and also handling wise. The two picks to me in here are still the SASGs and the Super 90s. They both are pretty high on the burst and the sustain. The SASG, of course, is a magazine reload. The Super 90 is a per shell reload, and kind of depends on what you're doing with shotguns and how you feel kind of about that. Because with the Super 90, yeah, you could maybe put 2 shots out, kill somebody while you're running to the next one. You reload it. With SSG, you have to do the whole magazine. But then on the whole magazine, it is, of course, a faster reload. So if you're going all the way to empty. Let's go to pistols. And in the pistols, actually, not much change except the reloads. But it does actually change my pick here for some of them. As, yeah, my go-to kind of in the last season became in between the M45A1 slash tactical M1911 and the Card 45. The M1911s and slash M45A1 here didn't actually get any improvement to its reload speed. Well, a lot of the other pistols did, including the Card 45. And now while the Card 45 is just a tiny bit behind when it comes to burst between these two, the sustain between them is inverse, and yeah, the Card 45 is so much higher. This is one of those places where the sustain calculation also matters, where I'm going to pick, and I'm going to kind of go back to Card 45s for my general use. We have a few more rounds more. We have around the same burst damage. We have much better sustain damage, especially because of that reload. And just that reload by itself, being so much faster, feels a lot better, because you're not stuck in a long reload where you might get yourself killed. Being able to just fire gives you agency and lets you just, you know, make your own fate. In the MMRs as well, we didn't see any changes. Nothing changed up in here. So as well. We won't kind of per se discuss them, but yeah, again, just to highlight the picks in here, the White Death is overall the top pick. I would generally go with that. Also, nowadays, the classic M44 carbine is the base weapon of it, so the reload of it is actually pretty quick, especially on Hotshot nowadays, as it is much faster than it used to be 2 seasons ago. If you want to go with a bolt action one, to me, basically, you could pick any of the bolt action magazine based ones. Everything from this custom M44 to this tactical 308 is not too far removed from each other. And then basically, inversely, the reload kind of becomes faster as the damage kind of gets worse. But none of them really gives you any benefit per se over any of the others. So actually still sticking to an SR1 or a tactical 308 is kind of fine, or just picking the custom M45 because it is the highest base is also kind of fine. But yeah, that was already the conclusion last season because nothing changed here. Let's go and now to the per weapon type on builds. And we'll go down the list as they are in that main folder. Starting with ARs here, and I've upgraded the as a main thing as well. Just I've upgraded a little bit the look of these and kind of the functionality a little bit behind the scenes. One thing that I added, as you can kind of see there, although let's actually zoom in here already and I'm going to discuss that, is I separated out the talent. This used to be kind of in brackets in here, which just because I didn't per se think too much when we first made them, I just made them. Having the talent now separated, this can also mean that we can sort by the talent. So if you like copy it to your own drive, because you can do that with these files as well, you can actually, for instance, sort them in other ways. So you could, if you want to do that, or even, for instance, input your own build or such. That has actually helped quite a lot, also with legibility. And yeah, quite a good addition. Although yeah, it took a little bit of work to get that in here. Not hard work, but just tedious work just to get that. In the AR category, let's first discuss the big Lexington in the room. The Lexington is still good. As we see, it is, as we saw already with the without it being on build, it was ahead of the FAMAS. That's going to of course keep being that way. This is also then that F2000 here being ahead of the Lexington, because here, of course, we're on build. We're on a striker build, just an obliterate striker. The stats will matter for especially some of the talents and such. Even, for instance, for this, because striker being a little bit more crit starved, for instance. Although now with the crit chance, crit damage mods being kind of equivalent to each other, close to equivalent to each other, that makes a little less of a difference. But for instance, F2000 does move up a little bit as a choice, again, for high-end builds, for instance. But it never catches up to the FAMAS. The FAMAS is firmly the second place, and that's also the pick. If you don't have the Lexington, go with a FAMAS or a FAL or a CDAR or a F2000. Those four would be my pick, with the Lexington being the top pick, or just in its own category, basically. You could go with some of these mid tiers if you kind of need that. If you need a long rail with a faster fire or faster RPM, Heartbreaker comes to mind. M4 or P416, both could be good picks. Because yeah, both as well now. The P416 has the same fire rate since last season, or well, for quite a bit, as the M4. The general picks are still that. And then here as well, the talent list didn't change much, of course, because none of the talents really got touched up. So yeah, it kind of still goes in that same order of especially Sadist being at the top here. Now here, of course, I've also changed the wording for Sadist to Sadist Active, because we're kind of using Sadist as a just this is a 30% increase, and we can just kind of use that as our comparison point. It's not per se that Sadist is the best talent, because of course you need the uptime on the bleeds on the enemies, and especially with the diminishing return system, where enemies, when you bleed them, even with the OD in the team and such, eventually they basically just, if enough waves spawn in the same room, kind of, they just don't bleed. And that means that you can't have great uptime on this, or the same enemy especially as well, for let's say some of the legendary bosses or such. And then you have also, for legendary bosses, the Marauders, which don't bleed at all. So we have to kind of consider uptime, but yeah, just with Sadist Active, that's usually the top number in this. Now, of course, exceeded here by the Strega and the Chameleons and such. And I would definitely say as well, out of the exotics, Chameleon, Strega, both great picks. Chameleon, especially nowadays, I would definitely consider a general pick. You do need to be aggressive with it. You do need to play close range, but you can make it work. Same for the Strega for certain, but Strega I would say is more contingent on the content, especially for activities and such. You can extract enough from a Strega, especially for, let's say, public executions, which we do a lot of, where you have more than a few enemies, let's say 3, 4, or 5, kind of spawning all together. You can kind of get the stacks going, and then especially when you're killing some of the enemies with 0 stacks, of course, but the later enemies you're killing with 5 stacks, and then you can make it work. But yeah, Seda still, of course, killer, and then measured, kind of in that order. Ranger definitely as well, a contender as well. That's also my general picks for all of the automatic weapons in that order, kind of as picks, because killer, really good, especially as well in solo play. Its activation rate as well, pretty high, and yeah, as to plug here as well, I have a video on my channel about the killer activation rate, as yet. Sometimes there's still some debate on that. It isn't just the amounts of crit chance, it is actually much higher than that, and kind of depends as well on how big your crits are. And if you are intrigued by that, or like what is this guy talking about, go watch the video Killer Activation Rate. It's a rambling talk on my channel. Then as well, we see kind of going through the same talents as we always used to have. As well, I've done the addition of the AKM here as first sight, because yeah, the first sight can has the same traits, of course, as a Lexington, where we have, it can be freely talented. Its addition is in the form of some headshot. Looking at that actually, because in this field as well, it is important to note, all of these will have grade 28, headshot rate at 20%, so we're kind of counting as one shot is a headshot, and then 4 shots aren't headshot, and a DTA rate of 60%, although here that the only weapon that will get affected by this kind of, because all of the others are DTH, of course, will be the capacitor. But yeah, at 20% headshot rate, we see actually that the AKM, the first sight here, is actually ahead a little bit of the normal AKM on burst. Now, actually on sustain, we can already see that if we take this one, which is kind of 9.2, taking it to this one, we have a 9.6. So on sustain, they kind of flip on each other. But yeah, the AK, I wouldn't say the first sight is actually a pick really for me, especially that very long reload kind of sucks. Now as well, here as well, the reload speeds are of course with Striker, with the Striker 15 weapon handling bonuses, so you have to account, well, we are accounting for that. And yeah, going actually, we'll kind of quickly just, yeah, talk about especially St. Elmo and Eagle Bearer kind of being here in the middle of the pack. They of course don't have a damage talent, but they are kind of in the pack with some of the weapons with Optimus and stuff. The thing is, of course, with a high-end weapon, you can go with Killer, for instance. And then things like Chameleon are much higher because they do have a damage component. One thing I wanted to actually highlight here as well with the capacitor. The capacitor, of course, we have it here with just Technician, for instance, here, plus Tech, being actually decently high. The modifier of this season, when you're in overcharge, you actually get 7 tiers worth of damage out of the capacitor, making actually for rogue momentum, if you're staying in tier 5 enough, which can be of course done with a recon drone or such, makes the capacitor actually one of the top picks of the season, and it is 7 tiers. We'll actually likely look into that in a future video, because for most, it would have gone like, oh, it is 6 tier because 7 tier isn't, like overcharge isn't per se 7 tiers, at least not for skills. For capacitor, it is. So just to highlight that here, but we'll likely look into that in a future video with some quirks about some weapons and interactions. Going over to the sustain end, we actually see that, yeah, some of the weapons are now very sustainably high. Especially things like the AUG. It even got an improved reload speed. It is, of course, the AUG is the only weapon that has more than 30 rounds as a base here, at least from the high ends. It does actually work decently well, sustain end-wise, burst-wise, of course. We see kind of, yeah, it is, especially when we kind of compare it to, let's say, and go all the way up to a fall. It is a little bit behind there. The thing is, of course, we pick mostly on burst. the fights we have in Division just aren't long enough to kind of just go all in on sustain. And because of that, yeah, the weapons that are unsustained, we do kind of care about their sustain being high enough, but especially some of those mid packs. So for instance, the Honey Badger and such being a decently higher sustain than, for instance, some of the higher weapons above it, like the Fall and such, can make it a choice, especially as well. The Honey Badger handles quite a bit better than, for instance, an F2000 and such. The thing is, though, that the Fall is kind of also in that pack, and the Fall actually does sustain decently well, because we see actually, for instance, for the FAMAS, because the FAMAS has a pretty long reload, and it, of course, didn't get... Well, it got a tiny bit of improvement, got 0.01% or 0.01 reload speed change. That didn't help it that much. I'm actually having trouble finding the FAMAS. Let's actually do Control F FAMAS. You can also always do this for yourself. Yeah, we have there the sadist one at that point. And yeah, that does make a difference. Although keep in mind that, yeah, we haven't dropped too much in sustain here anyway. And then, yeah, on burst is, of course, much higher than anything around it. That's kind of the dealings there. So we're kind of picking more because of that on burst than on sustain. And the FAMAS can, of course, yeah, kind of do well enough, even with its somewhat lower sustain. But like actually in the future, kind of highlight this even a little bit more, how those differences kind of line up. But it is actually now interesting that they're kind of making the sustainy weapons even more sustainy. How far do they have to go into that before we actually maybe do consider some of the weapons that are higher on the sustain end? I'd be curious to actually see them kind of fiddle with this even more so than they have done so far, and maybe even go further with it. Because I would definitely say that some of these weapons, we could pick them. For instance, the AUG, I wouldn't per se say so, but because it handles pretty poorly. But Mark 16, ACR, things like that for ammo conservation already are decent picks. Although I would go with the Fall, even though the sustain is a little bit lower, its burst is just better. And yeah, that can definitely be a choice. Let's move on to LMGs. And moving on to the SMGs indeed. Not much changed here, of course. There wasn't even a base damage change here, except for the Dark Winter. We'll highlight it kind of in a second. There were, of course, a lot of reload improvements, and we'll kind of look at the sustain in a little bit. And some weapons moved up quite a bit, and a lot of weapons actually in the SMG categories also in using them. You'll notice that they're really fast reloaders nowadays. Starting off, yeah, Backfire, Chatterbox, really top picks in the category when it comes to exotics. Chatterbox, of course, if we kind of can keep it at like the 5 stacks, especially with a hard-hitting build that kind of kills with it quite well, you can get really good results. And especially, for instance, if you're doing sub-difficulty stuff, this used to, for instance, in the past mean if you're doing the League or some such, which doesn't exist anymore. But even for just getting some of the kills and stuff while grinding through the journey, you could drop the difficulty if you needed to. Chatterbox actually is a really good pick for that one because, yeah, your enemies are squishier, so they die more often. Backfire as well. Actually, I want to make a note to say here that the Backfire actually seems to be, if you're running it, because I mostly ran it on a build dedicated for it, 100% bleed resistance. You don't bleed at all. Turns out, actually, if you just run around with it with the strikers, after like a bleed or two, it doesn't bleed you anymore. Especially if you're just continuously firing, like not per se in a mission setting or something where you're going from room to room. Which means that for some fights, and people will have already likely seen this if you're kind of watching streamers and such, being used for the Wraith and the Lovebirds. In Incursion, for instance, this has become the go-to because even there as well, actually, on top of it, we usually have a healer, so it's just getting healed and then also hazard protected from the healing. But just by itself, you can actually run Backfire on a full red striker, and you bleed once or twice, and that's kind of fine. And then this doesn't bleed you anymore for a little bit. And that seems a little bit maybe cheesable. And we'll highlight it here because it's kind of out there already. I'm not opposed to just, yeah, once it's all the way out there already. On the burst ends, we see the Tac Vector and the SMG 9, specifically the SMG 9 and not the A2. Of note as well, so as has been asked actually recently, why some of the weapons have are compacted, like let's say the PP19s, for instance. There's multiple versions of the PP19. We're compacting those though, or the MP5, for instance. That's 3 versions, or the AUG. Why aren't we doing it for these? And that's because the SMG9 has actually 1 mod less than the SMG9A2. So it is actually a different base damage. We can just make out the bases on that end. We see that actually the SMG9 has a higher base than the SMG9A2. That happens with a lot of weapons. If they have a mod less, they usually have compensation for it in their base damage. That's also why on the main tables, you see them usually being higher. Kind of with the F2000 in the same way. It's missing a mod, but it has kind of compensation built into its base damage. So in here, we see that as well. The SMG9, just by itself, and then we just take another crit chance on the build, actually works out better than the SMG9A2. It has more than enough compensation. This is also kind of holding true nowadays for basically all of the picks, because MG5 kind of has the same, the AKM, not that we use it per se, but has the same, and several others as well. Or CQB comes to mind as well, the 6.716 CQB. This is kind of better than just the 6.716. So a lot of those weapons that have compensation actually nowadays have more than enough compensation for it, but I wouldn't, maybe I'm forgetting about some place where it's the inverse. So yeah, definitely still kind of make the choice based on this data and not just by that kind of, leap from here. And yeah, attack vector, SMG9, vector 9mm as well. It got actually a little bit improved reload speed, because for instance, the attack vector actually didn't see much of an increase to its reload, kind of in the same way like with the FAMAS, it was a tiny amount. But in the rest, actually, there has been. Of note as well is that, yeah, some of the weapons, like for instance the MP7, where they have a 40 round magazine built in, and we don't take them, because with most of these other weapons, we're taking plus 20 mag size and then minus 10 reload. Because of the built-in mags, for instance, on that, or the PP19 or the P90 or such, those actually have really fast reloads nowadays. And you can actually kind of go for them because of that. Although I would say that, for instance, attack vector, just, yeah, for instance, here already showing up with a very fast reload. But for instance, yeah, MP7 being able to like reload super fast, and now as well the chatterbox actually reloading super fast, although you don't want to reload the chatterbox, of course, kind of in combat. Or, well, if you're doing it, then you're breaking the talent, of course, and you're kind of resetting it. But yeah, some of those have actually really fast reload, and that does matter for them. For SMGs as well, kind of the same order, goes for talent-wise, sadist, killer, and then into the measured. And for general picks, I would definitely, like, sadist can be a choice, especially if you have OD or such in the team, or if you are running OD, or if you're running Ridgeway. Actually, the buffs to sadist last season were actually quite a big buff to running Ridgeway with Hunter's Fury. I've been actually quite enjoying that, or even with PFE builds, because you can extract a lot of damage from that sadist talent, and then you kind of give up on that chest talent for it, and of course the other exotics you could be picking, and then you get a little bit of regen in return for that. So there's actually some benefits, especially on the SMG, and with sadist, of course, on that, and also on LMGs for OD, especially the Carnage. But then, yeah, if we go kind of downish, also actually I should say, I didn't say that in the AR, I've also added in now no talent, as I see it here, and I've added that into both. In the past, we could kind of use fast stands or steady-handed or such as like it doesn't add anything to burst, so that's the baseline. But of course, on the sustain end, they do add stuff, and everything adds to sustain. So I've added in actually a no talent in as a separate category. And because of that, we can kind of compare to that as a whole. So you could, if you wanted to see how much the talent added in as a whole, you could take whatever for instance, if you want to know for, let's say, yeah, the UMB just as a pick, you take this number, you divide whatever the number is by the talent, by this number, and you'll know how much the talent added to it. Oh, actually, we should discuss in here, if we find it, yeah, the Oxpecker, the new edition of the season, of course, with Symbiosis. What we see is that it is actually a little bit behind the MP7s here. That is basically down to not much, basically, just the name. It is around the same percentages and such. Now, of course, on the MP7, we could have a damage talent. On Oxpecker, we have that where we are fixed with its talent. I would definitely say that its talent is very usable. I've kind of enjoyed actually running around with it solo. I would say it's not usable that well in group settings because it's just too chaotic. You need it to be a little bit controlled. You need to know when you need to pull out your shield. And I'm going to run up to that guy, pull out my shield, going to deal with this guy, and then kind of move forward. And because of that, it's kind of tied to tanking talents, basically. That's why it won't be a general pick or like a meta pick, but as just a choice to kind of run around and try to maximize getting the most out of this weapon. I kind of enjoyed my time with it. And yeah, it does have 50 rounds instead of the 40 from the MP7. And because of that, yeah, it does actually perform. It's good that they added in that 10 extra rounds. That's one that they added after the PTS. If we go to sustain end, we kind of see as well, one of the reasons that Chatterbox and Backfire kind of work really well is they are really high on the burst table, but also really high on the sustain table. So even the Chameleon, for instance, that we saw and such, don't match up to these. Now, of course, this is the 5-stack Chatterbox, but even the 3 stacks is not too far behind. And 3 enemies you could very consistently do, of course. That's kind of why the Chatterbox is actually one of my preferred picks in this category. We see kind of the inverse, especially the T82 one is a very slow firing and then fast reloading weapon now. And yeah, it's kind of way up there on the sustain. Now, on the sustain again, we don't per se pick on these talents or pick on going with the sustain end of the table. But even then, for instance, some of the things like attack vectors, for instance, here with Unwavering and such, those can definitely be picks, because with Unwavering and for that time that it is up, you do get decent burst and decent sustain. You're giving up, of course, a damage challenge end, but yeah, you're gaining so much in the sustain that it can be a pick for that. And that's why with SMGs, Unwavering definitely goes into that pack as well of like Killer, or Measured, or Unwavering would be the 3 picks there. I wouldn't per se put Ranger on SMGs. You don't generally don't want to engage in the ranges where Ranger is kind of effective. On the sustain end further, we don't see too many surprises, but yeah, especially some of those weapons that are super fast reloading kind of move up in this pack quite a lot. And it's not just that their sustain is so much higher, they feel a lot more comfortable to use. We see as well that Unwavering versus Fast Hands is quite a big leap between them with the same weapons. So for instance, here with we see, for instance, an M1928 with Unwavering, and we see that on the sustain end at least, that Unwavering, of course, is so much bigger of a bonus. But that's also actually expecting Unwavering to be up, basically, for its duration. But yeah, Unwavering, of course, is pretty short, and then you have to kind of swap back, and you lose the bonus. On the sustain end, yeah, the Oxpecker as well, kind of, in here, though, kind of ahead of the MP7, that 10 rounds making a little bit of a difference. Although, of course, against, for instance, here it's beating an Optimist one, but against the no talent one, it would be a decent amount ahead just because it is firing 10 rounds more before it needs to reload. But definitely not a pick for the damage end, of course. It doesn't have a damage talent, so yeah, it just doesn't compete that well in there. Let's move on to the next one. And moving on to LMGs, here we're starting off, of course, in LMGs, we're adding in Frenzy as one of the picks. That's also why in here, for instance, the JR9 and the Stoner are kind of, we aren't on the sustain list, we're definitely on the burst list, and they seem at the top. But of course, if you were to activate Frenzy with them and then run it for those for that time that Frenzy is active, that's also actually, as a reminder, why we generally, as the main point that we compare against, I generally pick something. Usually with most of these lists, it's going to be a weapon with Sadist, one of the first places where we can kind of consider it, actually doable. Because here, of course, for this GR9 to kind of do these numbers, we have to unload one all the way. You would do horrible damage for that time. And then if you were to use it in combat like that, But then, of course, what we can do is prep it and then use it in combat when it comes up. But just moving on to the sadist end of things, let's actually highlight all of the sadist weapons. I'm going to go Control F sadist. This highlights all of the sadist weapons. So we can kind of compare those against each other, so we kind of know what the top one is when it comes to general picks, basically. Here as well, Sadist acting, because we could also do this same comparison with no talent. Sadist, of course, just adding 30%, so also the build differences doesn't really matter for this. So we'll use it as our main comparison point. Now, of course, we have first the Carnage being the named Negev. With Perfect Sadist, that, of course, 5% more on that. That's going to be beating everything here. Then we see actually, yeah, that the RPK with and the L86 actually are still high on the burst. The thing is, though, that this M249 is so much more usable. Same for this Negev, same for this MG5. The Negev and the M249 have 150 rounds before they have to reload, even though they have a little bit of a longer reload on per bullet spent. It is much shorter, of course. And the MG5 kind of the same. This is why, for me at least, the RPK and the L86 have kind of gone by the wayside, and I'm kind of swapped over to M249s and stuff. Especially as well with Striker, M249 or Negev actually have pretty high rate of fire. Same for the MG5, much higher than either of the RPK or the L86. That's kind of why they've kind of gone by the wayside, because actually they're still not losing on burst. It's just that the reload is kind of horrendous when we can in 3.48 seconds get 50 rounds back, or well, 60 rounds actually. Although of course as well, the RPK lost 5 rounds as well last season. Or in just a little bit more time, we can get 150 rounds back. That's quite a difference. Although in this case, this is the rate of fire one, so we have 100. Of note as well, then, there actually we should highlight again. So the rate of fire ones are rate of fire pouch. So this is actually 100 rounds. The P is for just the normal pouch, where we would put plus 50 rounds in there. The BM is Big Mag, so only the L86 or the RPK, they actually take the big mags. They don't take pouches. So that is important because, yeah, this is a 100 round version of that one. Because if we kind of compare it to how we mostly run it, the MG5, for instance, here with the pouch, we're actually not including the MG5s with rate of fire in here because it just doesn't make sense with a 50 round. It is actually pretty high, but we could actually have that same 50 rounds with the M249, although with a much worse reload with higher burst. So in the MG or in the LMG category, the sustain actually, because they are pretty close on the burst, and the sustains actually matter here, kind of. Because we can see that going from, for instance, this M249, we're kind of dropping down a little bit to this MG5 with pouch. So they both have, the other one has a rate of fire max, so it's 100 rounds. So they're both 100 rounds. But then the sustain of the MG5, just because it reloads so much faster, as I'm trying to kind of follow this line, there we go. This is 120% of that base. And this one is actually 102% of that base of the RPK, basically. And yeah, that's kind of painful. That's why my go-to has become the MG5, specifically the MG5 and not the infantry MG5 as well. With all of these weapons, to point that out as well, we're going with crit chance third stat. That is overall the best pick for that slot, especially nowadays that we can flip crit chance mods to crit damage on the weapon itself and not lose anything like we did in the past. Then moving on a little bit, one of the ones that of course kind of got some buffs and such, although I'm actually trying to find it, although it's way lower than I even thought, is for instance, yeah, Sonar has been coming up quite a bit of like, oh, it's reloading super fast. First of all, the MG5 is kind of reloading around that same speed. Now, of course, here actually as well, I would say that for the Stoner, that overall, it's still, for instance, a better pick to go with the rate of fire mod for it. going with that 200 rounds, because actually if we kind of go and try to find the stoner without without the rate of fire mod in there as well, going for that 250 rounds, which I just see way too many people doing. If you're going with the Negav, or not the Negav, the GR9 or stoner, I would generally pick just the rate of fire mod, because keep in mind, for instance here, we've dropped down so far that we're in the same lines as, for instance, a Negav with flatline or strained versus a stoner with sadist. This is kind of, yeah, the what kills the stoner for me, especially in comparison to the GR9 next door, because if we kind of go here, the stoner is down here with a rate of fire mag, the GR9 with a pouch mag, so with 250 rounds, again, not what I would pick per se. And the other one is quite a bit higher. And the difference in here is kind of around 5% against whatever we're comparing against at the top. The rest of this kind of stayed the same. I did actually in here as well kind of add in no talent, of course. So kind of these end parts are going to be clumped up parts. But what we can also see actually, if we actually go with no talent, let's actually do that, no space T as our search term, again, we would see kind of the same order of things as with Sadist. That's what we're kind of comparing on Sadist, as that's kind of just easier to do, as it's at the top. But without talent, yeah, it will be RPK and LE6, but generally we don't pick those. And let's go actually look at why we don't pick those. Also, yeah, exotics-wise, because all of the exotics are kind of pretty far down when it comes to comparing, especially against killer or measured as talents. Now, of course, the thing is that some of these can do different things. So Bullet King, of course, for instance, has, you know, it's steady-handed plus, basically. Although, well, steady-handed has accuracy and stability. But even the Pestilence, for instance, with one full stack of damage going around, is still, you know, it's middle of the pack. It's against a Negav with Optimus, for instance, next door, and things like that. It isn't, well, for instance, Iron Lung is actually pretty competitive in its damage, a little bit higher. And of course, this is without having to have had 50 rounds first to kind of get this 100 stack or this 50 stacks going. And then that means that, yeah, none of the exotics here are per se that great, including the blue screen, where it is decent, but yeah, compared to especially LMGs with damage talent, they can output so much more damage. But you can get a lot of utility out of these, because especially as well, Pestilence, I quite enjoy it, but DPS isn't the metric to kind of compare it on. It's especially that it can kind of hit enemies while you're hitting other enemies. It is basically an extra buddy kind of damaging enemies, staggering them and such as well. Going on onto the sustain end, we see again that actually, yeah, the frenzy is kind of showing up way high there. But that's also why we're kind of comparing here at a little bit lower with by going with steady-handed, oh no, sadist again, actually. Sadist as the active thing, because yeah, steady-handed basically, of course, for some of the weapons would not be the correct pick, because with a 50 round or a 60 round RPK, where we also have steady-handed on it, you're not triggering it every time. Now, of course, with GR9, you can kind of see it as more realistic. But then here as well, actually, if you go and find, because there's of course one standout in the sustain category, which is the Bullet King. Its burst is its sustain. Its burst and sustain is actually so high that while things like GR9, actually, let's go find the GR9s in here. And bring them all up. So for instance, a GR9 with a rate of fire mag can actually be competitive against the and it's interesting that both of those are kind of close to each other, the rate of fire and the pouch, because of course this extends for sustain purposes. This extends the time between reloads. So the rate of fire doing more damage per shot, because on the burst, of course, this one was higher. We can see that this one is a little bit less than 5% higher than the other one. But isn't a big step from that GR9 with Sadist active to, for instance, a Bullet King. Now, of course, the GR9 isn't with that, we wouldn't per se compare it, but with steady-handed we would. And that's actually below the Bullet King. In general, I would, if you're going for like just the infinite fire, while this, of course, also has accuracy and stability with steady-handed, that also can be actually annoying sometimes, because when it falls away, it's much more annoying. And yeah, the Bullet King, I would say overall, if you're going for that, I would nowadays just pick the Bullet King. It makes much more sense in that way for the sustain end. And yeah, we see actually that the MG5 and such actually does do decently well in this pack, where we have, if we go back to Sadist highlighted, just as a 30% flat buff on both burst and sustain. We see that it's kind of middle of the pack. It isn't at the very end, even though it was pretty high. The thing then is, of course, that the LAD6 and the RPK that were really high on burst, that's M249, RPK all the way down there, and then LAD6 all the way down there. That's kind of what kills them for general use. This is the reason why sustain then also matters in all categories, not just here. Yeah, let's move on to rifles next. And moving on to the rifles, the last three were, of course, on Striker. This one is on high end. The rifles would not per se make too much sense on a Striker setup. You can definitely use them there, but you would stack kind of with something else, with the AR or something, and then maybe have them as a secondary for just the last remaining enemies. In here, yeah, we see kind of the list as was. Vindicator, with it always being active, kind of quite high. Diamondback being quite high. Merciless, if you get 100% of your shots on target and such, and you were to activate it every time, kind of high. Now, of course, all of these are contingent on other things. So, for instance, that's why the uptime on Vindicator kind of matters. The uptime on Merciless kind of matters. Kind of as with Chatterbox a second ago. But Chatterbox is 3 stacks. You can kind of make happen. But when, for instance, with the Vindicator, when it's inactive, or the Diamondback is inactive, or the Merciless is kind of you're just hitting targets and not making explosions happen because you're kind of maybe missing a few shots in between. They're very low on the burst list. That's kind of why in this category, while the exotics in, for instance, the last 2 categories towards the top were contenders, in here, I would consider the Vindicator kind of a contender, but you need to be hitting those marks quite often. And sometimes you just can't, as well, is the thing. Because it might mark their body and they might be behind cover. You can shoot their toe and their head, but yeah, those aren't marks, so you're not getting the bonuses there. Then we kind of see actually the M16A2, and this has come up in conversation, and actually just to highlight it here as well. Some people ask me like, why don't I recommend this weapon? I somewhat do, but the thing is as well, to keep in mind with the M16A2 is that it isn't firing continuously like the rest nowadays. It is still a burst fire. Every time you click, it fires 3, and you have to keep re-clicking to fire 3. That means that, for instance, with the Mark 17, this RPM, as long as we're holding the button down, it is actually just firing at that RPM. With the Mark 16, unless you're macroing it, which I wouldn't recommend doing, because that would be kind of cheating, basically. If you're trying to just hit this, if you are human, if you're not a robot, it's just going to be impossible to always hit this RPM. Now, you lose always a little bit because of that, and that is a little bit lossy. That means that while this is ahead by a little bit, it will likely lose quite a bit in that conversion. And likely even more so because it's a 3-round burst. It feels kind of annoying to kind of use, because every time that you're firing, it's doing 3 shots. It does take some time to get used to that. You can definitely get used to that and make sure that you kind of are recoil compensating 3 times after a click, but it is much more natural, and also a big difference now with the other rifles like the Mark 16 or any of the other ones that can compete with it, where you're either clicking and holding it down and just continuously doing the recoil compensation. But even in the past, doing a click, when we had to, doing a click and then a recoil compensation, doing a click and then a recoil compensation, felt much more natural than it is to click, 3 recoil compensations, and then a click again. That just will take some time to get used to, and yeah, there's a cost to that, basically. So, but I would definitely say that the Mark 16 is a contender, or the M16 is a contender. Especially because also its sustain is pretty good, as we'll kind of go into the sustain in a second. My general picks here still Mark 17, a 6 CQB, as we kind of saw. We needed to discuss from the base ones that the CQB, of course, has -1 mod, but it is actually on build. It is higher even with us flipping a crit chance mod or crit damage mod to crit chance, or a crit damage stat to crit chance, the 6 CQB is still ahead, and that's kind of makes it one of my picks. And then, for instance, the USC handles so much worse than this MDR as well, than the Mark 17 or the 6 CQB, that I would generally just, go with the better, or the even if they're around the same level of burst, and then, the handling then matters as well. Although we can see that as well on the sustain end, especially between the MDR and the 6 CQB, that the MDR is also way behind there. So, and we also see that same thing basically with the USC versus the Mark 17, a little bit higher up there. And that's why the Mark 17 and kind of the 6 CQB kind of are my general picks, and they handle well enough in the other category, or in accuracy, stability, those kind of categories, and reload speed. They kind of work perfectly fine. Although I would definitely now say as well, the M1As, basically all of the M1As, because they have gotten such a faster reload than they used to have, are also all contenders. Especially the classic M1A, in certain situations, I could definitely see picking these, because for ammo conservation purposes, there is likely nothing better than the classic M1A. Now in this season, we have Pistolero, but maybe next season, if we have the reduced ammo directive, I could definitely see running a classic M1A just to conserve ammo. And now it's less painful with a much better reload. In the rest of the category, we did see actually, of course, some base damage changes. Let's actually, again, do the same thing. Control F Sadist. We'll just compare them as they are with Sadist. On build, now, of course, with the weapons that we were kind of concerned about, which was the UAC and the Resolute Mark 47 and the Lightweight M4, all of them already had the same amount of mods, so it's not going to be any different of order than what we had in the other list. The UIC definitely, while I want to love it, it's kind of, I would just never recommend this weapon. It is giving up too much in its damage, especially against the Mark 17, that kind of handles pretty decent as well. Not as good, but there is also a point where you're giving up too much for comfort. Now, if you're just going for comfort, if you're just running around and just shooting, and you're not doing something, you're not doing incursion, you're not going raid, although you wouldn't per se take rifles into raid or anything, but you're not doing anything much more complex, and also you're just solo, so you're not bringing anybody else down. That's kind of fine to just go for comfort. We sleep in pajamas, we don't sleep in our suit. We sometimes want to look our best, but sometimes also we just need a little bit of comfort. And there's nothing per se wrong with that. And the UIC would still then be my comfort pick in here, because it does feel a lot better than it didn't get enough of a buff, as I saw some people already discussing that. It got a buff, so it must be good now. It didn't get a big enough of a buff to its base damage for it to be that big of a contender there. Especially as well, one of the things I was considering it for is just like, this can do ammo conservation pretty well, so maybe we pick it for that. But the classic M1A kind of does that, and quite a bit better, and with much better burst. Now, of course, sustain-wise, quite a bit worse, but burst-wise, quite a bit better, because that reload speed on the UIC is also super fast, so it's sustaining pretty well. Then, actually in here, not much else has changed. We can actually kind of just push to the sustain end of things and kind of discuss that. And that is that, especially here with Sadist active, we see kind of the order as well. And this kind of why the M16 is a contender, and we should actually kind of highlight it as such. And that is that it is at the top of the list of sustain as well. So weapons that can do that are generally pretty good picks. In this case, though, you need to get good with it. You need to be firing it close to its RPM for it to actually do this. We see the UIC is the top sustainer in this field, and not a surprise. It is a slow rate of fire, a pretty big magazine together with a fast reload. That was always going to do well in that end. But as we kind of talked about, the Mark 17 is for me a much more general pick, because we're pushing up that burst quite a bit and just losing a little bit on that sustain. And even though the Mark 17 is now with the plus 20 round, and then in this case as well with Zvia, this is why this is not just 30 but 34, as the build that we kind of compared it on was with Zvia. This leads to that it's it's a smaller mag. It's the smallest mag of kind of the big mag ones here. But it is still, yeah, it is more than enough basically. And its reload is fast enough that it doesn't completely fail in the sustain end. For the rest of this, not much has changed further. The UIC kind of moving up, the resolute changing up, doesn't really matter too much. The resolute handles so much worse that I would pick the UIC over it, basically, to begin with, as long as they're kind of in the same county, which they definitely are. They are close enough that I would kind of pick the UIC over it just as a general use. Let's maybe, yeah, let's move it on to the next one. And moving on to shotguns, nothing changed. So on to the next one. No, let's actually discuss them for just briefly. Mostly, as do again, highlight the poster child. We've highlighted all of the sadist here by just control Fing sadist. This is the poster child of why we don't just pick on burst, or you know, we don't bully burst, but we don't pick our weapon choices just by burst. Sadist. Double barrel shotgun, really high burst, incredibly high, so much higher than what we're comparing it to, which is this SASG, which is kind of the comparison point with Sadist there. This one with Sadist is double. So we picked that one, right? No, because the giveaway here, though, is that the sustain is kind of low, but actually the thing that actually kills it is technically damage per mag. We have to reload way too often. It has just 2 shots, double barrel. Once it's done, it's done. And because of that, we just don't pick it like that. Now, and on the sustain end kind of reveals that to us. What we see here then as well is actually on the shotgun end, if we've highlighted the sadist ones, SASG Super 90 kind of filling up the top. But what we see then is not like the other weapon categories as well, where we had a bunch of sadists, for instance, in the SMGs or in the ARs, we had a bunch of sadists just all following each other up. And then goes to kind of, you know, the killers and stuff like that. No, here we have the sadist SASG and Super 90, and then we have the brazen version of them, and together with that, the perfect, the light blue Super 90. Then the killers, then the brazens of them, again, still the SASG and the Super 90. And then as well, here the brazen, if you it's kind of annoyingly hard because 8 and 6 kind of look the same, but it is 8 stacks, this is 6 stacks, because of course we can have different amounts of brazen. And then pummel even, and then actually is when an ACS starts to show up with sadist. These two are quite a bit ahead when it comes to the rest, and definitely that's why it makes it the general pick. That's also why this is also kind of the picks talent-wise. We can go sadist if we have a good way to trigger it, and even on a shotgun build, Hunter's Fury, for instance, we could go with the Ridgeway again. To trigger sadist with. Brazen, a really good pick. Killer, a really good pick. The way that killer works on shotguns, just to highlight that here, is that actually it isn't that you just have to have because I've seen it being told this way, and this is wrong. It doesn't just need to have a crit in one of the pellets of that shot, because that would basically mean 100% uptime, as long as you're getting the kill. No, those shots are technically happening in order, and whatever shot hit and killed the enemy, technically the pellet, if that was a crit, it will count. So it's still the killer activation rate rules apply, where it is still higher than just the normal amounts, but not significantly. And actually, a little bit, there's actually a quirk there, because it's kind of crit and not critting kind of within the same shot. It is dropping a little bit, but actually, yeah, it's kind of, it's dropping versus a weapon that is just firing 1 per 1 per 1. Although the size of the pellet is still, the crit size of the pellet is still higher, so it is much more likely to kill. But yeah, then as well, yeah, the pummels and such, pretty good choices. And of course, pummel has some utility with the reloading. That's also why we have it double in here with just the damage component of it, and then also having it with the reload. Now for the burst, this doesn't matter, of course, but on the sustain end, removing the reload kind of makes quite a big difference. And then yeah, tool-wise, of course, ACS kind of, it is a tool for stacking for any build that does it per pellet, like Heartbreaker and Striker. So that has its place, but yeah, I would definitely say that things like a 612 and such, generally, I just don't pick anymore, where it used to be actually the general pick. Of note, though, is of course, yeah, we have the M870 and the SPUS 12 being being the two highest base damage ones. Generally, I still pick M870s for Headhunter, and that's because you can put more mods on an M870 than you can on a SPUS 12. There is one standout, though, in the SPUS 12 category, especially for headhunting, and that is the Thorn, which is the perfect Brazen, of course. And as we saw, Brazen, a really good pick, and that makes it that one kind of gets salvaged just because of that perfect talent where you just also need to hit 4 pellets, because SPUS 12 does actually handle quite a bit worse. The exotics kind of landing... all of the exotics in this category don't have a damage component to their talent, basically. While they do, well, Scorpio technically has that debuff, Sweet Dreams technically insta-kills, but they don't have it's not a damage talent per se. Now, of course, the Scorpio with that amp active here, as we have it, kind of can compete with a 20% buff. But yeah, just the Scorpio by itself is kind of low, and so is the other exotics there. On the sustain end, we kind of, and this is again also why the SASG and such kind of do matter, is, for instance, here we're kind of have pummels first, because if we kind of remove the reload, of course, from a double barrel shotgun, yeah, it would compete, but good luck getting 3 shots in 2 shots, or 3 kills in 2 shots. Technically possible, because you can actually double kill with 1 shot if the pellets hit 2 different people and kill them both. But yeah, good luck with that. That's also why when we kind of look at the Sadist, when we don't remove the reload from it, then 870 actually sustains pretty well, because it has actually a pretty good reload. So it can be a contender there. The 612 as well, actually looking decent, but then as a magazine reload. But both of them are so much lower on burst that for general use, yeah, we still lean up against the SASG and then basically the Super 90. And here they're a little bit lower on the sustain, but keep in mind as well, here we've only dropped around 15% versus the top sustainer, which is that M870. The M870 definitely also a pick nowadays with how fast it reloads. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. And we come to pistols, where not much changed, only reload speed changes here. There was a, both in the PTS and then in the final version, basically a typo, kind of alluding to changes to the harvest. Nothing changed about the harvest. So it's still staying that same, and it is still definitely the top pick when it comes to Headhunter setups. Now, with our damages here, we're kind of, again, starting with the burst. The Busy Little Bee actually can burst pretty well, especially if you get 10 stacks of it. Although the 10 stacks of this, usually you would apply it to something else. This would be getting 10 stacks, swapping, and then swapping back, which you just wouldn't do. You would just use the other weapon. So this one is more of a theoretical, but also to kind of just show how much you can extract out of a Busy Little Bee. A Busy Little Bee can actually be a very strong tool, and definitely one of those things that I see quite often people going, oh, they should just open it up to having infinite exotics equipped and such. This would need to be nerfed for that to happen. If we could all just have a Scorpio secondary and a Busy Little Bee, we likely would. And because of that, yeah, this is one of the limitations. Is just, yeah, this can't be. This has to be coming at a cost, and that is that cost. Liberty here with 30 stacks, although you need to body shot, of course. Here as well, we have that 20% headshot, so just not realistic at all. What we're kind of talking about in the main tables as well is that my general pick, as we have again highlighting the sadists here, was the M45A1 or the Tactical 1911. Both of those doing really well on the burst, and then they have decent mods as well. Because, for instance, the M1911 is a little bit behind them, although still you could pick it. But this one is, of course, without any mods on the build, or any mods on the weapon, so you would need to alter your build a little bit to kind of, if you're maining this. Now, this is, again, as well, on a build that actually is made, a high-end build, the high-end Tech Tank pistol, and this doesn't have really high crit chances, crit damages, so actually it doesn't hurt too much with this 1911. But this would actually be a little bit worse on, for instance, if you're just using it as a secondary on a striker. And of course, as a secondary on a striker, actually, to just, yeah, there is an elephant in the room, and that's a TDI card custom. Now, the TDI card custom, we don't use it for its damage. Its damage doesn't matter. It is that it has that extra skill tier, and we can use that to get an extra hive charge out. That is by itself, making it the pick for just general red builds. The question here is more, what would I pick if for dedicated pistol build that isn't a headhunter, in this case, basically. And yeah, that was kind of the main thing of contention here. But nowadays, I would actually pick the Card 45. The Card 45 has so much better sustain, because we're comparing to that M45/Tactical 1911. Our burst is dropping by a little. Our sustain is so much higher, though. Both of them as well have basically the same weapon handling characteristics. They're basically copies of each other. And then the Card 45 has more rounds as well, and the same optimal, making it that the Card 45 kind of will generally become my, if I'm using a pistol for purposes of damage, and I don't per se need, or I don't need a TDI card custom, this really only happens on crit-based pistol builds, which don't happen much anyway. But yeah, I have a few now. Or I have one at the very least, together with actually on skill builds, because for instance, for the pick on an Eclipse as the weapon alongside, because you could put, for instance, Future Perfect there and try to like sneak in a kill. I would generally, for that, for instance, pick a Card 45, because you don't need that extra skill tier that the TDI card provides, because you're at 6 skill tiers generally with that. Then yeah, for Headhunter, there is, but that we basically don't sort by DPS. We sort that by just the base damage of the weapon. The Harvest is the general pick, like nothing comes even close to it. The 586, 686 that it is based on is already the highest based out of the rest of the category, and then the Harvest has another 10% on top. So the Harvest as the Headhunter pick. Anything else we need to per se discuss in here is that, yeah, that none of the other picks I would generally go for. There is a case to be made for the X45s. The X45s have a drop-off that is, most of the other weapons in here, when they drop off their optimal, they actually quite quickly drop to the lowest point. The X45 actually has a much more, it actually drops off to 100 meters. Several weapons have this. You can kind of check it in the game. Things like in the AR category as well, several weapons have it in that way. That means that especially because of the pistol's short optimal range, quite often you'll be just outside of the optimal range. But especially for if you have to take mid-range shots for some reason, then yeah, the X45 could be a contender because of that. But you are dropping a lot in bursts. I would just generally pick this Card 45 and actually be in optimal range, or have the build set up in a way that it is going to be in optimal range, like with that high-end tech tank, rather than try to, extract a little bit more from how the optimal works on the X45 and such. On the sustain end, we kind of have the same story as we kind of said there. Here, the Card 45 is actually, if we're just sorting by sadist, the top one, and we can actually see that even the Card 45 TDI card custom, which of course gives up that 10 DTOC, is quite high up in here. And because the 1911, or well, the Tactical 1911 and M45, which is here, didn't actually get anything to their reload speed, they've dropped off quite a bit. So they're kind of, they're the top burster, but the lowest sustainer. The Card 45 is the second highest burster, but the top sustainer as well. This makes it pretty easy to pick this, especially when the handling is basically the same between them. Talent-wise, of course, yeah, Killer being nowadays a much better talent than it used to be, makes for a great pick for pistols if you want to do damage with the pistol. But then, of course, usually the pistol kind of gets relegated to talents to kind of support other weapons, like, for instance, putting Finisher on it, or Future Perfect, or things like that. And yeah, the discussion there is, of course, a little bit different. If you just want to do the deal damage, Killer actually is a standout, of course. If you can get Sadist active in some ways, especially as well. A pistol build, for instance, with Ridgeway with a Bulwark Shield could work actually decently well, and I've messed around with that. Although I prefer Intimidate quite a bit. You can't extract so much from that chest talent. Yeah, let's move on actually as well to Marksman Rifles right away. In the Marksman Rifles, nothing changed here, of course. The weapon-wise, I did actually fix up some minor errors in here. Well, actually, it's not in here. It was in the reload speeds of the base tables, just to highlight that. But for the rest of this didn't get per se touched. And of course, because we're also not highlighting any talents here, I haven't actually changed anything about this, because with the other ones, at least, we've kind of cleaned it up, added in no talents, cleaned up how the talents kind of show. And I will actually likely follow up an MMR video for this about using maybe other talents. And because while Determined is really good, if you don't want to use Determined, what becomes the choice then? I would definitely want to deep dive into that. And thus we have come to the end of this video as we've gone through all of these lists. Yeah, a little bit longer than I wanted it to go for, but yeah, it was hopefully worth it and hopefully enjoyable. I did want to reiterate some of the things, even though some might have been double, for those that maybe hadn't seen the other videos, or just to reiterate them, and maybe, you know, even picked up something or maybe even those that are kind of familiar with the older videos picked up something from this one. Having updated all of these, as yeah, I tried to get them updated pretty quickly. Hopefully we won't get too many balance changes, although I would expect, at least whenever we get the DLC, that likely that will come with some increase or changes to weapons again. But now that we've changed these a little bit as well, I'll be much better prepared to kind of alter them. And of course as well, it doesn't take too long to alter them. It's just a little bit of tedious work. But I'm happy to have it done and have them updated. They're of course all available. They'll be of course linked in the video description, so you can jump to them and look at them through them on your own leisure. And yeah, we'll go ending off this one. For future videos, actually, we're gonna go into we're gonna actually consider some of the talent picks for Striker, and of course as well, we're leaning towards a special date that until now as well, the last 2 years on the channel has been an auspicious day, as one might call it, as of course we're gonna go do some April foolishness as well coming up. The next build showcase will be Refactor, and I'm gonna already kind of start working on that, and hopefully have that up pretty early in April. But yeah, next one up, I do actually want to discuss a bunch of talent choices that we can make for Striker, as some have been somewhat forgotten, like Focus. And of course, there's been a lot of debate about the backpack of Striker, and I kind of want to wade into that now, especially as well. We have got some time to kind of let it simmer and such. And I definitely think I have something worthwhile to say in that conversation. So that'll likely be the next one after this one. So yeah, I hope you join me for those. If you did enjoy this video, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It does help out. So I'll do that little bit of shilling here. And I hope to get you into these future videos. And as always, have a good night.